Hi.
Hello, Janet.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Good. Is this John?
This is John.
Oh boy, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Can you see me?
I can see you. Can you see me?
Not yet.
Hang on a minute. All right, you should be able to now.
There we go.
Oh my
I did
God.
it. Well done. Perfect.
So I can hear you, but actually, I'm going to turn off my phone now. I don't want to take any phone calls. Good. Hang on just a second. So I found my diary.
Yeah.
And I have some photographs and I have the paper that I wrote about the folk health disease. Oh my God, which got published. It was my master's paper. I have to tell you, I don't know if this is going to be in the interview or not, but early on, we pretty much knew about the gay population there. But I'll tell you what, I did not have one word about gays in my notes. Now, the clinics, I lived in a neighborhood where half the people there were gay. I have family members that they still are gay. And I'm pretty open about all that. So it didn't really was no big surprise to me when the guys came in and they were looking for reactions. It depends. It was also central Pennsylvania, very, very conservative. Where are you at? Are you in Philly? No, you're national.
Yeah, I'm in Philadelphia.
Well, I'm from Philly, taught at Philly, but grew up in Harrisburg, not part of that typical central Pennsylvania kind of conservative culture, worked in a lot of that. So I will talk about it, but my reaction was different from some of the locals there. I will say that much. Yeah. So I guess I'm sort of ready. I looked over the questions. I have a few notes.
Barry has joined us.
Oh, good.
Good
okay,
morning,
I don't
Barry.
see him yet.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hi, Barry.
Hi, how are you, Janet?
Oh, now I see you. Hey, look at us. This is pretty exciting for me. I was telling John, I read the diary. I didn't start till yesterday. The paper I read the day before. I just couldn't look. For some reason, I couldn't look at everything. And then I finally thought, I got to read this through. Found my photos, made some notes, and, should be sort of interesting, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
I'm glad to do it. Yeah.
It's definitely interesting for us to hear this history. So,
Oh my God. And, I wrote notes every day about certain things. It was sort of an ethnographic research, and I can talk about that sort of later on. So I guess, I did see a list of questions. That's probably the best way to start.
Yeah, I'll start with questions. I'm not necessarily going to take them in order or even necessarily cover all of them.
Okay.
You may sort of address something in one question, so I'm not necessarily going to go back to it. But we'll just basically have a conversation, I think. So one of the things that I'll do once we start recording, I can shift the Zoom focus so that what it records is just you and not me and Barry. That might affect a little bit. That might affect a little bit what you see. I'm not quite sure what you'll see on your end. You may see yourself and not me and Barry.
I can see a corner of myself now when I put the video on.
Got it. Yeah.
That's up to you.
But yes, thank you so much again. We're really appreciative. And I guess before we get started, are there any questions that you have?
It's not that I'm nervous about. I'm trying to, it's a lot for me to think about. And it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
We're not spring chickens anymore. But I have some different things I want to say, and I may have to refer back to some of my notes. Absolutely. I try to pull some things together. So give me a little time to look at that too.
Absolutely.
I'm delighted to be a part of this, very frankly. And then once it's all done, you can tell me, like, if I ever want to look at it or what the citation is for other people. I saw parts of it in Harrisburg, of course, but I've not seen, I don't really know. Is it all housed in Philly?
So the exhibit right now, of course, is traveling.
Yes.
But the oral history interviews will be up on our site in Philadelphia.
Okay, you can send that to me. I can get that later. That's fine.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's see. I'm going to start.
And John, just
Yeah.
so you know, in case we run much past 11, I'm going to have to just leave the call, and because I've got some folks coming over.
Yeah.
Okay.
No worries. Yeah, if you need to excuse yourself, just do so. We'll carry on.
Yeah,
So I'm going to start the recording here if I can find where that's at.
Looks like we're recording now.
Oh, we're recording already. Yes.
Uh-oh.
I forgot that I discovered the feature where you could set that in advance. So I did that. So we're good on that. And I'm going to see here. That puts the focus on your camera.
Yes.
And so yeah, let's get started. So to begin, I'll just introduce who we have here. So my name is John Andrews. I'm the director of the archives at William Way LGBT Community Center in Philadelphia. And I'm joined also with Barry Loveland, who is head of the LGBT History Project for Central Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. And we're joined today with Janet Foreman, who we're interviewing. And I should say that today is Wednesday, October 21st, 2020. So Janet, just to begin, would you mind saying who you are and spelling your last name?
Yes, my name is Janet Foreman, Foreman, and I actually use my middle name, Janet Tull, Tull, Foreman.
Terrific.
I'm a retired nurse practitioner.
Yeah. So I think to get us started, would you mind just describing where you were living in 1980? What were you doing professionally at that time?
Yes, in 1980, I was living in Harrisburg in the neighborhood known as Shipoke in South Harrisburg, which was supposed to have been plowed down by the Redevelopment Authority. It was an older established neighborhood, but it had been flooded a number of times. And we sort of became community activists living there because we didn't want the neighborhood torn down, and it stands still today. I became a nurse practitioner in 1977, which is early for nurse practitioners. And the time professionally, I was working at the Lower Dauphin School District with the middle school and high school as a school nurse practitioner. I was going to school part-time for my master's degree in nursing and working full-time. And this experience when I worked with the Marilitos was the summer of 1980, where I was still going to school part-time, but off of work since I work for a school district.
Right. So do you remember when you first became aware of the Mariel boat lift and the fact that Cuban refugees would be resettled in the area?
You know, I don't know exactly, but it was in our newspapers. I started working there in June of 1970. So it was March or April when it was the planning coming down. They came down they came down end of May and early June. I missed the first 2 weeks when they were there. I was still finishing my job. So actually I worked there. My first day was June 12th, 1980. My last day was June 22nd. And I actually heard about it from a nurse practitioner friend who said I should go and work there. Health and Human Services was hiring. It would be a very interesting, unusual experience, and the pay was good. That's what they told me.
Right. Did you have any hesitancy about doing so, or were you excited about doing so? What were your thoughts about that?
Oh, I was very excited about doing this. Don't forget, I was getting a master's degree in community health nursing or public health nursing, population-based, working with different cultures. It seemed like a very good opportunity for me, particularly to work as a nurse practitioner with a different kind of population. I remember when the Vietnamese were resettled at Fort Indian Town Gap. I had just started working as a nurse at that time. That was years before that, but very interested in working with the Cubans in a resettlement process.
Right. And so were you hired by Health and Human Services? Was that the agency that hired you?
Yes, I went in, interviewed, filled out an application in those days, and I was hired.
Right. What were your duties?
Well, it's supposed to be primary care as a nurse practitioner working in the clinics. There were 6 clinics. I think they closed one, was down to 5. They had emergency clinics set up. It was quite a bureaucracy. They had them based on sort of populations. That had a women and children's one, they had a single men, they had single teenagers that came, and there was another one. And I can't remember if it was a single for the men again or also for the children and family. So primary care, we really did work with people if they had minor acute problems, cold, sore throats, any kind of illnesses, chronic diseases. We did diabetes teaching. I have to say it was a very stressful situation for many of them because, you know, they had this boat ride. They didn't really talk about the boat ride so much. I was there 2 weeks later when they were settled. I can tell you this, that they did tell us, even when I started, they had been really settled there already by 2 weeks, that when they left Cuba, they were stripped of their medications. If they had any names and addresses of relatives or sponsors they could be in contact with in the U.S., those were taken. They, of course, the individuals told us that the Cubans sent gay men there. They didn't like gays in Cuba. They sent people with physical disabilities out. They separated married men and women. They might keep the husbands and send the wives and kids, or send the husbands and not the wives and children. So they were happy to get out of Cuba. It wasn't a positive situation for them, but they talked about those things. And medically, when they came, some of them were in real emergency situations, which were resolved by the time I got there. So people that had insulin, diabetics, blood pressure medicine, etc., they didn't have anything for 2 weeks.
Right.
And it was sort of a trial by error. We got them in and got them set up.
Right. So were you working across those different, different populations?
Yes. I had asked to work with women and children because my background was really pediatrics, a school nurse, which is a sub-element of pediatrics and families. But guess what? I was sort of a floater there. They sent me all around to all the different clinics. So I was with the single men, I was with the teenage boys, I was with the families, and I was with the emergency room. There was one clinic set up for emergency kind of needs. So I was sort of all over. It was a good experience as far as that goes.
Right. And I think you did mention earlier, so you started June 12th and you went through 26th, is that right?
Yes, August 22nd. So I basically spent the summer there. Then I was going back to school full time to finish my master's degree.
Right, right. And so you had mentioned before we started that it was not a surprise to you that there were gay refugees. But can you say a little bit about discovering that there were gay refugees among the population?
Well, particularly when I worked at the clinics with the single men, I mean, the many of them came out, and I think they were trying to test us. I'm a gay man. Some were dressed up. Some came in with sort of stereotypical behaviors and sort of wanted to see what we would say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, for me, I've been around a lot of gay people in my day, even at that young age, and that was 40 years ago. So I didn't get particularly excited or unnerved by anything. Some of the locals did, but they pretty much came in and presented themselves. I'm gay, happy to be out of Cuba. They talked a bit about that. That's how we found out from the individuals ourselves.
Right, right. Did you ever encounter any lesbians who would identify?
You know, I was trying to think back. There was nothing in my diary about any lesbians, and I don't recall, you know, any of the women coming forward. But it was primarily the men were very vocal about it because they had their chance here. As far as they were concerned in Cuba, it was not handled very well, as most people know.
Right.
They weren't well liked or accepted there.
Right. And so your reaction was sort of not surprised that there were gay refugees. What about some of your coworkers?
Well, you have to understand, Central Pennsylvania, we had a lot of people working the clinic. So, you know, we had people that were sort of aides, and we had professionals, we had translators, interpreters. Some we got from the Cuban refugees themselves. They volunteered their services. But a lot of the people were pretty much from the local central Pennsylvania area. And I don't mean to be stereotypical about them either, but they're well known to being rather conservative individuals. And, you know, if you had any ethnic identity or certainly homosexual identities, they were not thrilled about it. And people would occasionally comment about that. Some of the staff would comment about that, which didn't go well with those of us. Most of the professionals, the nurses, the doctors, we didn't really feel that way. Our job there was to work with this population. They needed health care. And we're sort of neutral about people that need health care. But it came up from time to time.
Right, right. So I was intrigued by, before we started also, you mentioned that you didn't find any references in your diary to gay Cubans. And so I wonder, do you think that in general it wasn't discussed or not?
Well, it was definitely discussed, particularly by the locals that had their problems with gay individuals, but by the professionals,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we sort of took it matter of factly. Yeah, if they were gay, and if we asked them what their health problems were, and they came out with all different things like everybody did. So it wasn't so much of an issue for us in terms of dealing with gay individuals. But I will say, you know, the INS, the immigration people, and the military people, they were dreadful. I can't say every single one of them, but the majority did not like Cuban populations, did not like refugees. They did not do well with them when they had to deal with them. And does that sound familiar? Some things haven't changed and some things have gotten worse 40 years later. Right. So we really saw it in relation to the military and the INS. They were not thrilled about dealing with a lot of gay people, mostly men. They weren't thrilled at all with gay populations, didn't like refugees, and really didn't know much about Cubans. They didn't like them either. Now, there were a few that were okay, but the majority were pretty negative.
Yeah.
And we heard this almost daily.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure at what point during that summer, but at some point a number of the gay Cubans requested to be in their own barracks, and that was accommodated for them. Did you ever, well, first of all, did you ever go to the barracks for consultation, or was it only in the clinics?
Well, the clinics were set up in the different barrack areas.
Uh-huh.
We didn't usually go into their living quarters, but we were right in, so like 5-5 was the number of the one single male barracks. And I didn't really remember that, but that may have, I'm sure that was done. If you have notation that they wanted to live on their own, I wouldn't doubt that for a minute, because they weren't well liked by some of the other groups there. But so we didn't really go into the barracks, but we were right in the midst of their living situation. So they had to come and go and see us, but we had a barrack set up that was not a living, but it was we were in the areas.
Right. I'm curious how you communicated with them. Did you know Spanish?
I did not know any Spanish other than like hola and sí. Right. But it was very interesting. We had a real issue with communication. So we had to set up, you know, there were interpreters, some were local, some were volunteers from the Cuban refugees. So I had to speak to an interpreter. The people would come in and with their problem, and then they had to go, the interpreter had to tell me, then I had to go to the interpreter. I didn't really like that, and many of us did not like that. So I learned Spanish, like what I say, on demand. I mean, I can still say a few phrases. Abre la boca, open your mouth, and donde es dolor, where's the pain? I don't have any accent. But, you know, when you're a nurse or a doctor, when you're working with people, who wants to go through third hand? It really is not very helpful, because you're looking at their reactions. You know, when you're doing an assessment of somebody and with their care, you're looking at everything. If you can't understand them. So I have the numbers here somewhere. You know, there was a small number of people, there were like 12% that they knew Spanish. So coming in the professionals, they knew that was a small number. And there was a group of us who we learned Spanish that by towards the middle or the end of the situation, I could really talk with them one-on-one without having the interpreter. I had them nearby, but I was pretty good at understanding things. And then there was a whole group, they had no interest in learning the language. I don't even think some of them said si or hola to them. And I have the numbers here somewhere, but that was about 50% that didn't really want to communicate with their language. So they used interpreters, and that worked out well. But as when you're giving care, for me, it did not work out well. There was a number of us who really learned on demand like I did. And I was very happy to do that so we could work right with the individuals.
Right. So were your conversations limited to, their particular medical concerns at the time, or did any of them ever talk about life in the camp or life in Cuba or anything like that?
They did, particularly as they realized they were in a comfortable situation, because the Cubans came to us at the beginning, it was just strictly medical care. They realized that we were mostly non-judgmental. They could come in and have a conversation with us, and we weren't screaming, yelling about them or giving orders. It was very difficult for them. So they came in droves, and we really established, I think my role changed from being a professional. I still was a professional, but we became more of a confidant, sometimes friends, because they came often. They had to make some excuse to come in, very frankly. And they would say, I don't know, some minor ailment or stress. A lot of it was very stressful, as you might imagine, coming from a boat ride, being let out of the country without many resources. And they would come and talk to us, and we befriended them because we were the non-judgmental group as compared to the military and the INS. So we heard a lot of different stories about all kinds of things.
Right. Are there any particular ones that stand out to you?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. They opened the jails and let what they call the petty criminals out, and people were pretty open about that, which kind of surprised me. But first of all, there were a lot of people in there for speaking their mind, politics against Castro. They were thrown in jail, and that didn't work out well. So they were happy to come out from that group. There was definitely some groups that said they were petty criminals and thieves, and they were let out. So that was interesting. They would tell their stories, and they hoped to make a different life here. Some, reverted to to their personal behaviors. The families talked about being split up, and that life was very hard in Cuba. There was issues with trying to earn a living wage and trying to get food, and they were very strictly controlled, politically. If they tried to speak out or speak for themselves, it didn't go very well. So we heard a lot of those kinds of stories from people. Mostly they were glad to come over, and they knew where they were was a temporary respite until they got resettled, but it was difficult for them.
I'm wondering if any of the medical concerns they had sort of went back to their treatment in Cuba, whether that might be like nutrition or an injury or anything like that.
Well, the people came with, I remember doing a lot of diabetic teaching. They came as diabetics, and I mentioned earlier a lot of their medicines were taken away, so they had to get on medication. Our medication was sometimes different. Insulin is insulin, but if they were on an oral medicine, we did a lot of diabetic teaching. People with chronic health problems like blood pressure, cholesterol, the medicines were a little different. We had women, they're pregnant. We had one woman gave birth, and we sent her to Hershey Med Center. But when she came back with a baby, there was no setup for her. We didn't quite know when she was coming back, and there was a big bureaucracy. We were Health and Human Services, but she did go to the medical center and the labor and delivery went fine. But coming back, there was really no setup. She didn't have any kind of layette or baby clothes or diapers or cribs. I mean, even a drawer of something. So it took a lot of organizations to get that. Of course, there we were the ones with, like, it was all dumped in our laps. I don't think it was out of neglect. It was people weren't just thinking. They sent her back, and then we didn't. There was one woman that was pregnant. There are others that had small children there, and were able to care for them. So it was a little crazy at times. We got to do a lot of different things that really were not under like primary care, medical care, nursing care.
Right. So I'm wondering, out in the community, but not necessarily the local people working at Fort Union Town Gap, but locals who were sort of observing this going on, people that you knew. do you have a sense of their reaction to the refugees coming to Pennsylvania?
Well, when I talk to people like in the neighborhood or my friends, I talked about some of the negative stories and the positive things, but the negatives were the INS, the military, and how they treated them. And people were generally horrified. They really didn't like that. And they were surprised. Well, not entirely surprised, but they didn't expect that to happen. But it was very remote to most people because the Cubans came and it didn't affect anybody's daily lives, if you know what I mean. So when I came back and told stories to people, it was like, oh, you really did this, and they had this problem, and you solved that. But they didn't like that we came back with the problems with military INS, and also it was quite a bureaucracy. There were a lot of other agencies that coordinated with us, Red Cross, and the different sponsorships, different churches. It was hard for them to get sponsors initially. It was hard to get things done. I mean, we could do our care, real basic things, but to get anything else done was really difficult because of the bureaucracy. And some of that was INS, some was military, some was just the coordination of all these agencies.
Right. Are there any members of the medical teams that you made friends with?
Well, we did. I dug out some pictures, and we really made friends with the people that were interpreters and some of the doctors that were there, Cubans and non-Cubans. The interpreters were wonderful. They were mostly the Cuban volunteers that interpret, and we really relied on them, and we really developed some friendships with them. And the pictures I have are taken there was a couple of patients. I'm taking a blood pressure of somebody, looking in somebody's eyes. So I know they were patients. We became friendly there. It became very social with them because they came every day. They got to know us. They worked with us. They knew what we were looking for. So I enjoyed that. And some of the other people did too.
So the photos that you have, are those photos that you took yourself?
Well, I'm in the photo, so I don't know who took them. I'm in the photo. There's one I'm examining somebody. There's two where I'm examining somebody, and there was a couple of group photos. We had sort of a going away dinner, and so they're mostly nurses, but there was a couple interpreters there too. So So it wasn't me, but somebody took them, and I'm thinking it had to be my camera. I don't remember, but if you like, I can take a picture of those and send them to you separately so you can see they've sort of aged in time, but they still should be clear enough. And I have some names in the back, but no last names.
Yeah.
There was one young couple that I got to be friendly with. They came to our home with my husband in Shipoke, and they were eventually relocated to New York. I know we helped them with the will. My husband at that time was a lawyer, but I don't remember. I don't have their names written down. So they actually came to the house. They settled in the Harrisburg area for a short time and then went to New York. Nobody else came to our house, but we had quite a social group going during that summer with the people that work with us.
Right. So I know that, certainly there were journalists and professional photographers that were around and doing what they do. Did they ever come to the clinics or interact with medical staff?
If they did, it wasn't when I was there. I worked 4 days a week the entire summer. I was still going to school one of the other days. I don't remember them coming in, and I guess you could look at the clips of the Patriot News. I'm sure they were there, but I suspect Tom Loftus was our public health. He was from HHS. He was our administrator. So I'm sure they came in. I know there were problems, later on there were riots in the camp. I'm sure photographers came in, but I don't really know what they got. I don't remember what was in the newspapers at that time, but I was not personally involved with any outside photography.
Right. And so when you mentioned riots, what were your thoughts when that took place?
Well, it was the heat of the summer. I'm looking for my notes because I have the dates down of some of the riots, and I'm trying to figure out where I wrote that. So the riots, we had some, and it started off in the men's single section were primarily the gay individuals, and a number of the men had decided to dress like women, and that didn't go well with the military and the INS. This was their chance. They couldn't do this very easily in Cuba. And so I don't know, they got alcohol, and there were drugs around. it got very hot then. There were riots, there were some gang rapes, and those were reported in the newspaper, evidently. I have some notes about that. I do have dates, 2 dates on 7/23 and 8/5. There were riots. It also was the peak of the summer. It was very hot. You know, the living situations were bad. Those bunks were built in World War II, and I guess they had some running water, but no air conditioning, not a lot of windows. They were bare bones. It was different. People were not complaining about the living situation, except it was very hot, and there wasn't much to be had. So the weather didn't really exacerbate things, but the military made comments to people. The INS made comments to people. They teased them when they were on patrol. So I'm not sure exactly what all came to have, but there were riots inside, and mostly in the men's section. I don't know if there were riots in the women's section at all. But I do have one note there, and I guess it was in the family section. There was a 2-year-old boy was found left on the floor, and I think they had cleared out of their particular bunk because there was carrying on going on. And he was found a little bit later. He was fine, unhurt, but it was just messy for a lot of people. We actually had to treat them after the riot. So I know there were lacerations, there were some head injuries, concussions.
Yeah.
And then the military, I don't think it was the INS, maybe the two combined, they did a search and seizure, mostly the single men's sections, probably where the young boys were, the teenagers section too. And they found some drugs, found some weapons, found a lot of alcohol, and they tried to clear all that out. I can't say that I was scared coming to work because it didn't bother us, but it was really a clash between the military and the local Cubans themselves. And they did not like the men dressing up as women. I mean, and everybody was leering at each other. It was very ugly. Things were said. It was not a pleasant time.
Right. So I'm wondering, what would you say motivated you to do this work in the first place?
Well, I got a call from this other nurse practitioner, and we'd only been practitioners a couple of years. That was fairly new in the world of being a nurse practitioner. And my degree was in community health nursing and public health, my master's degree. So I was very interested in working with a diverse population. I thought there's a perfect opportunity to work as a nurse practitioner in this kind of population professionally. It would be good for me professionally. And I always like people of different cultures. To me, it was the intrigue. I was never afraid of that. It was the intrigue of it.
Yeah. And so looking back on it, do you have any thoughts about, did it affect at all the course of your life?
Well, I wrote down a couple of things. I'm trying to find that. I think it did. Even though I didn't have any long-term friendships with anybody, I think it professionally helped me expand my view of dealing with another culture and what that meant. In those days was called culturally competent. One of the things that really changed my course of life is that when I went there and kept this diary, it was really an ethnographic approach, which is I wrote down about direct observations of behavior and what was going on. And I think I identified what I believe was a folk health disease, cysto. And it's an illness that's not part of Western medicine, and it's not treated with Western medicine drugs, and a lot of people didn't see that. But I'm looking back, when I looked at my diary and talked with people, I think I identified that. And I used that for my master's paper and did extra research on that and used my case study. And they approved my master's paper, and then I published it. So that was nice. It's funny, I looked up the literature yesterday about cysto, and I saw a dissertation from somebody, University of Texas. He'd quoted my paper.
Right.
So from 1980, I was really pleased with that. So it helped me professionally and expanded my view to really work with a different kind of culture and really accepting of them and accepting of a folk health disease. I think there must have been a cure in the area. What we did with them didn't help. Western medicine isn't helpful. But today we're much more open about wellness, about non-Western medicine. Acupuncture is very well accepted, all kinds of other things. And I don't know how well people are versed about folk health diseases this is one that's particular in Hispanic populations, but there are folk healers around that have done that thing. I think it's more accepted today. I really, like I said, I really got an appreciation of the people with a different culture. That was wonderful. And when my next job after I had my master's degree, I taught at a university in Philadelphia, Thomas Jefferson University, and I taught the students. I was able to lecture about this experience and culturally diverse, what it means to work with a different kind of population. So for a lot of those nursing students, they really didn't have any idea about working with different populations. It's what they came to school for, among other things. So I had a chance to do that as well. So it helped me professionally. Personally, it just expanded my view of really being interested in people with other cultures and accepting them for who they are. That's a big thing. And in nursing, I think we're pretty accepting of that to begin with. So it gave me firsthand experience.
Yeah, I am really interested in hearing more about your diary. And had you kept a diary before this time? And did you start it specifically to begin to do this research?
Well, I didn't know it was going to be research. I started specifically for this particular experience, and I wrote a lot of things down. I wrote day-to-day things down. I wrote down about the organizational charts. I have lots of comments about the military and INS, that they were less than helpful. Like I said, not unlike today. It's a little scary to see that what we're doing today and what we did 40 years ago, it's very sad for a different population. So I really start with this experience, and I have organizational charts. I have day-to-day notes about the experiences, the kinds of things I saw working in the different units. And I have several what I call case studies when I went back and looked at it and thought that I identified these folk health diseases. They didn't want to talk about it with me because I was a Western medicine person. They accepted me as a nurse, but they didn't really want to talk to me about this because it wasn't something that was part of our Western medical system. And I think they may have talked to other people. I suspect out of the thousands of people there was some cure there, although I don't know that for a fact. But at least two of them came back that were better. So I'm thinking they may have had a cure, work with them. They talked with somebody in their culture to help treat this thing. It wasn't treated with medicine. It's treated with, well, there are some things that a folk healer would say and do for them to help treat this.
Can you say more about the disease, what you learned about it? What were its symptoms? How did it manifest?
Yes, I pulled that out to see. Well, my paper was 44 pages, but today they talk about it. The SUSTA was really found mostly Latin America. It's Hispanic populations. It's a serious fright or startling experience that causes an asustado to lose their vital or essence and fall ill. And psychology got into this a bit, at least in the definition today, where it's a soul loss through some kind of fright. The symptoms are depression, listlessness, weakness, loss of appetite, and restless during sleep. And there were some others too. So the treatments that I said, I think they found outside of us, there was some praying, there were some herbal treatments, visiting a folk health healer. One piece of literature talked about treatments with holy water, with herbs, and then talking to psychologists. So I'm not sure what they would have done. Not in our day. This was more recent. So you can imagine an experience like Fort Indiantown Gap, startling or frightening experience. Mm-hmm. They left their homes. They had this boat ride. They got here. The climate was different. The food was very different. They were living with not their normal living situations, and to come to a new country, most of us are immigrants. I can't imagine coming to a new country with nothing and then starting all over again. And most of them spoke, of course, they knew Spanish. Some spoke English, not very many. So I think there are probably more examples of this folk health disease, and I'm glad I was able to study it and talk about it, and I used it in my teaching and also my practice.
Right. So did you first learn about it from patients that came in that talked about it?
Nobody would say that to me. Uh-huh. But when I went back and started talking to when I was talking to some of my professors, and they said I should look this up, and I tried to look it up a little bit during the experience, but they would not talk to me about it because I was Western medicine, and I might have been friendly and all that and spoke a little Spanish, but I could not help them. So I did a literature search. I looked at the symptoms and disease in the population, and it popped up. So and my work was ethnographic. I really did write down people's behaviors, what I observed, including their symptoms in 3 particular cases. So it's not exactly speculation, but that was speculation in my case. That's what I thought it was, and so I wrote the paper based on that, but didn't go into that with any intention. I had a different topic for my paper, but did not have any intention about doing that at the time. But went in, had this experience, wrote everything down, had dates. I did have bureaucracies. I didn't write down people's names so much, or I had 1 or 2 first names of patients, but so that was the beginning of my paper, then the research and the okay with my professors, of course, at University of Maryland to go ahead with this topic. So it was pretty fascinating for me, and it's still being written about today. That's what I like, and they're calling it, in my day, it was called cultural competency, and I want to see if I can find the note that talks about what they're calling it something today. No, I'll come up with it in a minute. I wrote it down somewhere, but socially conscious medicine. I thought that was fascinating. I found that yesterday. That's what's in some of the literature about working with populations that have folk diseases or other kind of illness, non-Western things. Socially conscious medicine. It was we didn't have that in my day. That term was different, but it existed.
Right, right. Do you ever find yourself wondering what has become of different people that you've met?
I did at the beginning. Particularly the couple that came into our house, but they relocated to New York, and we didn't maintain a contact with them, and they didn't with us. People came over, they were happy for the help, then they wanted their privacy. They were looking to find with their own population. So, and a lot of the, we had, I guess about 20,000 people to start with, and then they were sent to other camps. And by end of October, they closed it because the rest of the people were sent to Arkansas. So they weren't in the area. It was difficult for some of them to find sponsors in our area. Central Pennsylvania has Puerto Rican populations. There are other populations from South America, Spanish-speaking populations. And we had some Cubans here, but it was not easy for them to find sponsors locally. It just took a while. Yeah. So they weren't all, once they left, they weren't here anymore. They were, and some stayed in the area, but I really didn't spend any time with them. If they got sponsored out, hopefully they've been able to get, I'm sure they got citizenship and live their lives. They're not facing what a lot of the refugees are facing today. Right. It's difficult to get citizenship. So I don't really know what happened.
Sure. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Medical privacy has changed a lot since then. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about, what you were then allowed to say about someone outside of their treatment, or certainly that's changed, right?
Well, you know what? It was 40 years ago, but we had a very good sense of confidentiality. So we may have talked about it, but never used people's last names, mostly in the clinic. Certainly I would come home with some stories to friends, but never used anybody's name. Probably wouldn't be doing that today, but they asked me, particularly with the riots, and they were just curious what I was doing that summer. But mostly I try to talk about the positive things. And there were a lot of positive things. But medically and the diagnosis and the treatment, I really didn't discuss that, other than I mentioned, like today in the clip, there were people who were diabetics. We did diabetic teaching, pregnancy. There were CDC came in and set up a separate testing for venereal diseases. I thought that was interesting. Mm-hmm. We really was a very holistic approach to healthcare, and I was pleased with that. I don't think we have some of that today, at least not in the public health. Monies have really been cut, and funds, you can see that with the current virus. So to get back to the privacy, we're always confidential, but it's a little stricter today. You probably couldn't even use people's first names in issues and didn't talk about it. But in publishing my paper, certainly I didn't use any kind of names. I had initials, and it was confidential as to what I did. So nobody would know who those individuals were that I believe that I saw the folk health disease in. So that's not really changed that much.
Right. I'm wondering if there are any other stories that stick in your mind that you would want to share with us.
Well, let me look at my notes here a minute. You know, some talked about their lives and some really didn't, other than it was funny that the people I mentioned, the people that came out that had been in jail were very open about why they were jailed and they were happy to be here. That's a little bit different. We did hear from some people, mothers and their children, they left their husbands there. They weren't happy about that. And I did talk about the riots, but I'm trying to think other individual kinds of things. I don't know that I have any other particular stories that stuck out, although I was surprised at, towards the end of the summer, we were feeling burnout. It was tiring. We saw on the average, there were 5 clinics. We saw over 100 patients almost on any given day. And it was stressful. I think the Cubans were stressed out. They were really the issues with the military and INS. Most of the people that I work with, they were kind, supportive people, happy to leave and come to this country. And we're very focused on being positive about a chance to start over again. I think we saw a lot of that from the gay population, from the men in the individual, males camp, and also from the teenagers. They were really trying to find their way too. So there was more positivity from them. They had a chance to live a different life here. And I think that's the life of an immigrant story, even with difficult situations being, kicked out of Cuba with very little notice. They were finally able to go. I'm really hoping I believe they found their way. That was 40 years ago.
Barry, I wonder if you have anything else that you would like to ask?
Well, Janet, you mentioned earlier that some of the gay Cubans presented themselves to you in the clinics as gay, and that they had some like stereotypical behaviors, and that they dressed a little bit or cross-dressed perhaps. Do you think that they were doing that to sort of see what reactions you would get, or did you feel like they were genuinely behaving sort of the way that they normally felt?
Well, that's a good question. I think they were definitely testing us out. They wanted to see our reaction because we were the non-judgmental. The word got around that HHA, we were the Health and Human Service, HHS, we were the non-judgmental group, and many people came. We had a lot of repeaters, including men from the single men's camps, a number of them who were gay, and they came all the time too, and they would just come in to talk with us. But at the beginning, I believe they definitely tested us out. Some of them that came with different dress or certain real stereotypic mannerisms, they were clearly looking for our reactions, and either we reacted or we didn't. And most of us, at least the professionals, didn't really react. And some of the locals didn't react, but then whispered about them after they had left the clinic, which we were not, the professionals, and we were not happy about. So we didn't really we had our own moments with the staff that talked like that. We really didn't accept that behavior, but people are people. They're going to say and do. And after that, they just came in. They were comfortable with themselves, who they were. They just came in. I don't think they tested us all the time, just at the beginning.
Do you think that, did they talk at all about their experiences in Cuba that were maybe different from some of the straight population?
Well, I think sometimes they had trouble getting and keeping jobs because if people suspected they were gay or they said yes, they were not able to get jobs because of that. I don't remember too many other things about the issues with just, being gay, other than it was not accepted well in Cuba, and a lot of them were thrown in jail because they were homosexuals. They did talk about that with us, and of course, that's not an issue in our country. 40 years ago, we had other problems here, if you were gay, but they were happy to come here. Really work issues. I don't know if it affected their social issues, but they were very happy to come here.
Mm-hmm. Did you get any sense from them about their families, whether they had left their families back in Cuba, and if they were close to their families at all?
Yeah, it really varied because many were close to their families, but a lot of their families did not accept them being gay individuals. They really did not. At least that's what they said to us, and that was difficult. for them. That's part of the reason some of them were very happy to leave, because they weren't getting support from their families. And that was, many cried about that. That was not easy for them. I mean, I think that as human beings, we expect our family to support us no matter what. And they didn't always have that. Some did, but they still left. They had a chance to leave and they left. And then some of the families were supportive, not negative, saying, oh, good, you're gone. I know I'll have to deal with you again. More of the families were, if it's your time to do something different, to be in a different country where you can be more free, they wanted them to go.
Do they talk at all about the treatment once they got to Fort Indian Town Gap by the INS and other officials there? Did any of them talk about that experience?
Well, yeah, they did, because we were talking about it. They would come in and say they were manhandled, or we were in a funny position because we were the neutral ones, and we really couldn't say. We tried to report things to our administrator. His hands were tied too. It was a really funny situation. Yeah, they came in and talked about them a lot, and we were also seeing and hearing things, and we really felt we couldn't really help them. That was difficult. We just had to be careful and just try not to get any of them agitated. And some were agitated if you just walked by them. I mean, that's not everybody in the military or INS, but a lot of them.
Right.
Are there any people from that time period who worked with you, who helped out, that you remember by name that you think we should seek out and see if we could talk to?
Well, Tom Loftus was the administrator of Health and Human Services. He was not from our area. He was, brought in, and I'm not sure where. I don't remember where he was brought in from. I don't know that he might be a good person to talk to, because he was the head of the Health and Human Services division. But that was 40 years ago. You could check. That's the only name that I really have that might be of any use to you.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's all I have. This has been really fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
That was my pleasure. For me, it was a good experience. Frustrating. It had its frustrating moments, but I was very glad to work there that summer. And my eyes were open about a lot of things too. I just can't believe how people were treated. That left one country or trying to come into another, but that's a common theme that we have here.
Right.
So overall, it was very positive. Professionally, it helped me be just more open, understanding people, who they are, and accept them in their cultural context. We think everybody has to be like us. I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure, and I'm glad I did it, and happy that I kept my notes and found these things.
Yeah. I think we would be delighted to get copies of your photos to the extent that you want to share them. And I'd say also, again, to the extent you're comfortable, copies of your diary entries would be fascinating as well. So perhaps give that some thought. And if it interests you, please let us know.
I'd be glad to share the photos with you. The diary, now actually, I could read most things. My handwriting is terrible. You might be able to read it. If I can get that to you and have you copy it and send it back to me.
Yeah, sure.
That would be fine. It's, and I'd like to have a copy of it. I don't know what I do with the original. Maybe I can just donate it eventually, but I'd like to keep the notes and everything for the timing. The photos I can send you. I can take snapshots of the photos and the names on the back of them and send that in to you. I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
You don't want to have my master's degree paper?
Actually, I would love it. That would be wonderful.
Oh, you know what? 44 pages. And I can't find, it was published in a journal that's no longer in existence, the Transcultural Nursing, and I found it in that gentleman's dissertation, and I can't find my copy of it, but that's short. But I can send you a copy of the paper as well too, because I have several copies of that, so I can definitely send one along to you. University of Maryland, they were great. Glad I did it, and then to have it published, I was really excited about that as well. So I'll definitely talk to you about that, and I can get the information to you. The diary I have to think about, but if you can copy it and get it back to me, I would, be happy about that.
Right. We'd be happy to do that. Well, thank you again. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks a
again.
lot.
It's my pleasure and good talking with you.
Okay.
Talking to you too.
Have a good day.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.